This video is a review on a book we found in public domain, public access, titled Forgery in Christianity, and it carries with it a Attribution-NonCommercial-NoDerivs 4.0 international license, so it shouldn't create us a copyright claim or strike, etc. And we brought this to you in video format for educational purposes alone. And it has a very detrimental rant on what religion is all about, Christianity is all about. This person obviously has a problem with it, or had a problem with it. And in these reviews, which basically trot all over it and say all this other nasty stuff. Okay, it's very, very long. We're not going to read all of that. Okay, so we're going to have a look at this particular book to see what it contains. Forgery in Christianity. Christianity and the Bible are complete farces, hoaxes, lies and deceptions. A documented record of the foundations of the hoax of the Christian religion. By Joseph Wheless. So we decided to have a look online to see if we could find some information about this particular person. We found this small amount of information. Joseph Wheless, Montgomery County, Tennessee, 1868 to 1950, was the place of birth, was an American lawyer who wrote promoting the Jesus myth theory, also known as the Jesus myth theory, Jesus mythicism, or the Jesus historicity theory, the view that the story of Jesus is a work of mythology with no historical substance, etc. He wrote this during the early years of the 20th century. He was son of Joseph Wheless, Sr., 1830 to 1899, grandson of Aquila Wheless. His mother was Myra McCall, died when he was young, and his brothers and sisters were by his father's second wife. So that could be the reason why he despises religion or Christianity, etc. so much. Wheless was raised Southern Methodist, but later questioned the verity of the scriptures. Okay, so he was a Southern Methodist for a while there, but later questioned the verity of the scriptures, studying their sources in detail. As a lawyer, he defended American free thinking and epistemological viewpoint, which holds that belief should not be formed on the basis of authority, tradition, revelation, or dogma, and should instead be reached by other methods such as logic, reason, and empirical observation. Yeah, use your common sense. Logic, reason, and try to stay in the reality. So he's American free thinker and atheist. In the broader sense, an absence of belief in the existence of deities. God with a big G, or gods with a little g. Less broadly, atheism is a rejection of the belief that any deities exist. In an even narrower sense, atheism is specifically the position that there are no deities, and so forth. So he's American free-thinking atheist. He defended them organizations. Was instructor in military jurisprudence at the University of Arkansas, and held the rank of major in the department of the Judge Advocate General. The Judge Advocate General Corps of the United States Army, also known as the US Army JAG Corps. Remember that TV series? That really pretty lady? And they investigated crimes within the military, etc. Is the legal arm of the United States Army. It is composed of Army officers who are also lawyers and who provide legal services to the Army at all levels of command. Also self-taught, Wheless was a successful lawyer and a very outspoken Jesus was a myth writer. He studied for the bar while articled at his uncle's firm. Wheless served as a counsel for several American free-thinking organizations and defended many cases involving issues of atheism. A specialist in South American law, he was also for some time an instructor in military jurisprudence. It seems to be repeating itself. At the University of Arkansas and a major in the Judge Advocate General's Department. For his writing on religious topics, he received the honorary D from the University of Denver. According to Wheless, not only had no one called Jesus ever lived, but Christianity and the Bible are based on deliberate fraud. Christianity's continued existence is a conspiracy using persecution and oppression to perpetuate itself to enslave people. Well, we believe that the Roman Catholic version was the Roman Imperial State Church under Constantine and these emperors. Christian pagan church definitely was. There's a difference between that form of Christianity, pagan Christianity, and of the disciples who followed Yeshua Mashiach, or Jesus the Christ, Jesus the Messiah. There is a vast difference between the two. Works. Is it God's word? Debunking the law of Moses, forgery in Christianity, and see also these people, but we talk about them, and there's some references here. So let's go have a look at this book. Continue looking at it. Forgery in Christianity by Joseph Wheless. Is it God's word? Forgery in Christianity, a documented record of the foundation of the Christian religion by Joseph Wheless, lately Major Judge Advocate USA, Associate Editor in Section of Comparative Law of American Bar Association's Journal, Life Member of American Law Institute, etc. Forward, and this is quite an extensive one, so we're going to go through it briefly. Forward, the disease and the cure. In some quotes, all truth is safe and nothing else is safe, and he who keeps back the truth, actually we get it, expand this so you can read it with us. Again, all truth is safe and nothing else is safe, and he who keeps back the truth or withholds it from men from motives of expediency is either a coward or a criminal, or both. Max Muller, The Science of Religion, page 11. The time has come for honest men to denounce false teachers and attack false gods. Luther Burbank. Man is a religious animal, is incurably religious, a commonplace of clerical rhetoric. The priestly doctors of divinity who unctuously utter these pious and apocryphal platitudes, fathered by the wish, urge the incurable state of mind, the religious neurosis of the patients, and proof of the divinely ordered nature of the malady or the illness, as patent of the necessity and importance of the sacred science of soul cure and divine warrant for the continuance and perpetuity in the practice upon otherwise damned humanity. It is the ghostly doctors themselves, however, by their quackeries have created the fiction of the disease, and who purposely keep the patient opiated and on the crutches of faith in order to make their calling and election sure, and to perpetuate their thralling dominion over the mind and money of man. Yeah, that's why they call them quacks, probably. The first recorded priestly ban by, they call doctors quacks. The first recorded priestly ban by threat and fear of death was on nature's own golden specific for superstition and priestcraft, the fruit of the tree of knowledge. Thou shalt not eat of it, for in the day that thou eatest thereof thou shalt surely die. Genesis 2:17. A warden with a flaming sword was posted to guard the tree. Sword and rack and stake, civil and political outlawry, social and business ostracism and loss of living, odious odium theologicum and foul calumny have ever since been, so far as possible yet, are the consecrated weapons of priestcraft to keep mankind ignorant and obedient to the priests. No beast in nature is so implacable as an offended saint, is axiomatic of those who prate of loving the enemies. As Jürgen picturesquely says, the largest lake in hell is formed by the blood which the followers of the Prince of Peace have shed in advancing his cause, and the selfish own, as we shall abundantly see in the following pages. Faith in a fatal decline. Howbeit, their pulpits and the press are lugubriously vocal with Jeremiads bewailing the ever-swelling tide of unbelief in the land. Throughout Christendom, the church statistics, notoriously patterned after the biblical model of the censuses in the wilderness, can claim at most some 40-odd millions of adherents, many of them by lip service and non-paying, therefore negligible, and others many non-distinguished for piety or common honesty, out of the 120-odd millions of our American population. The Reverend Rector of Trinity Church in New York City, one of the wealthiest dead-hand tax-free land monopolists in America, thus bewails, in America we are dealing with a country, the majority of those inhabitants are pagans. Only 40% of the population acknowledges affiliation with any church. New York Times, March 15, 1930. The ex-secretary of the Home Missions Council of one of the great churches bemoans, there has been a tremendous revolution in the history of the church. The country church is waning and dying. The revolution under our eyes is founded in the mode of thinking of the whole country. New York Times, January 8, 1930. An effective cause is found in a recent survey report of the Federal Council of Churches to be in the acceptance of a scientific view of life, general questioning of formerly revered authority, with absolute religious and ethical authority dethroned. Women have made no comparable advance in participation in church affairs. It can hardly be said that the church is an influential factor in the lives of the working classes. New York Herald Tribune, January 31st, 1930. A curious confession of likely cause and effect in the mental calibre of the credent is stated by the Reverend Publicity Council of a national church. All sermons should be keyed to the mentality of a 15-year-old youth. Half the people of the United States have the mentality of a 15-year-old youth. Most churchgoers enjoyed the children's sermon more than the one on religious philosophy, probably because it's more interesting, easier to understand, more entertaining. The average man can carry only one idea at a time. Herald Tribune, January 28, 1930. Verily of such is the kingdom of heaven. Like children, right? You have to be, come to accept it as a child. Apparently, you won't get into the kingdom of God if you don't do that. Be like that. All Fool's Day seems to be a sort of New Year's for ecclesiastical statistics and general stock taking of the faithful. Annually at that time, the very religious Christian Herald publishes its collect of figures on church membership. The Catholic Directory emits its own, and the generality of divine gives voice to holy lamentations and pious warnings to the church and to the ungodly. From this year's extensive crop, a little sheaf is added, the matter being important to our purposes and curiously instructive as depicting the accelerated downward tobogganing of the faith. The report of the Christian Herald discloses the total of communicants last year, in 1929, was 50,006,566, of which number it assigns a total of 18 million to the 14 sects of Catholic disunity. Herald Tribune, April 26, 1980. Though the figures of the Catholic Directory are 20 million applied, it's April 16, 1930. Under the alarming caption warns Protestant church that is lagging. The report of the director of the church survey bemoans the Protestant church in America is not keeping pace with the population. American Protestantism increased from 7, etc., etc. And he talks a lot on that, gives statistics, etc. Okay, guys, jump all of this because it's all statistics and so forth. It has here on page 15, the bottom paragraph, the precept of the doctors of every brand of divinity forever is catch them in the cradle and get them inoculated before they know. Because like the Jesuits state, children are gullible from the age of 0 to 7. Teach them all, and they will repeat it in their adult life. Cling to it maybe and repeat it. In the bib and rattle period, the childish brain is a soft, clean surface, soft as wax, to be moulded into vice, as His Holiness says. He's talking about the Pope. Helpless, it receives and retains whatever is first impressed or imposed upon it. True religion or false, Christ or Krishna or Santa Claus, Holy Ghost or the ghost of Africa, or Afric superstition. Give us a child until it is 7, and we've got it since for life, is the ghoulish axiom of all the faiths. Suffer little children to come unto me, for of such is the kingdom of heaven. As of the heathen nirvana, how godly a work is it to sear the thoughtless child mind with the brain of faith. How infamous and damnable to offer to the immature and inept youth in college freedom from the stigma of credulity. How crude and cruel for the Chinese to bind and cripple for life the feet of their girl children. How fiendish the custom of sundry savage tribes, ignorant of the light of the world, to clamp the infants' heads between boards so as to produce the hideous deformity of skull, so aesthetically popular among them. So that's how they did that. But how pleasing to gods and priests to fetter the child mind in the bonds of faith, and so to dwarf and deaden the mind's most precious faculty, reason. To succeed eloquently, said Ingersoll, the theologians invade the cradle, the nursery. In the brain of innocence they plant the seeds of superstition. They pollute the minds and imaginations of children. They frighten the happy with threats of pain. They soothe the wretched with good advice. All of these comforting and reasonable things are taught by the ministers in their pulpits, by teachers in Sunday schools, and by parents at home. The children are victims. They are assaulted in the cradle, in their mother's arms. Then the schoolmaster carries on the war against their natural sense, and all the books they read are filled with the same impossible truths. The poor children are helpless. The atmosphere they breathe is filled with lies. Cradle robbing goes on with vehement zest. The churches, the Federal Council of Churches, the Vicar of God, talking about the Pope, and his adjutants, all his priests, etc., all apply and main the arts of enslaving the babe in the cradle, the child in the school. In the encyclical of December 831, 1929, the right of the church to the child is proclaimed as above that of parents in state. Well, that can't be right. If you're the parent, I mean, that's not your kid, is it? According to this church, the kid belongs to them. The child is theirs. The secular public schools are damned, and the prole of the faithful are forbidden to attend and mingle with the irreligious state pupils. The frequenting of non-Catholic schools, namely those which are open to Catholic and non-Catholic alike, is forbidden to Catholic children, as such a school is not a fit place for Catholic students, who must be baited with the supernatural. Current History, March 1930, page 1091, Passam. Yet the banned and cursed public schools of New York City, forbidden to the faithful child, the ecclesiastical city government fills with faithful teachers for the purpose of bootlegging the forbidden supernaturalism into them. They work so widespread and active that the Cardinal Archbishop of the city, addressing over 2,000 of Catholic Teachers Association, praises their work of teaching faith in city institutions. New York Times, November 25th, 1928. So it's basically pointing to the Roman Catholic Church, that form of Christianity. In every rationalist effort to counteract such illegal propaganda and to free the schools from the pernicious influence of superstition is denounced and opposed by the Bible bootleggers of every brand of faith. In the brave instance of Russia, a medieval orgy of prayer assault on high heaven is made to counsel God what he ought to do to the Russians for their godless efforts to save the children of that church cursed land from the superstitions of priestcraft. In an ironical letter to the English press, in which he enters the list against the British critics of Moscow's anti-clerical policy, George Bernard Shaw, writing under a transparent Russian pseudonym, says, "In Russia we take religious questions very seriously. We protect our children very carefully against proselytizers of our fantastic sects, SECTS, until they are old enough to make up their own minds. To us it is inconceivable that a government would tolerate the inculcation upon helpless children of beliefs that will not stand the most strenuous scientific examination, or in which the teachers themselves do not honestly believe. We cannot understand why the so-called articles of religion, which have been described by one of the most learned and intellectually gifted of your churchmen as capable of being professed only by fools, bigots or liars, are deliberately taught as divine truths in your schools. Russia is setting an example of intellectual and moral integrity to the whole world, while England is filling its temples with traders, persecuting its clergy, and bringing up children to be scoffers to whom religion means nothing but hypocrisy and humbug. Herald Tribune, April 7, 1980. Thus the Church in chains the reason. The proudest boast today of the Church for its ex-pagan Saint Augustine is that as soon as a contradiction between his philosophy and his religious doctrines arises, he never hesitates to subordinate his philosophy to religion, reason to faith. Catholic Encyclopedia 286. So this great ex-pagan saint of the Church surrenders his reason to faith, and adverse. I would not believe the Gospels to be true unless the authority of the Catholic Church constrained me. Augustine de Genesi. Ingersoll, in one of his glowing, devastating periods of oratory, said somebody ought to tell the truth about the Bible, that I have already essayed quite comprehensively to do. In my recent work, Is It God's Words? This is the author. Alfred A. Knopf, Incorporated, New York, 1926. Second and third editions. I devote some 500 pages to an exposition of the fables and mythology of the Bible and of the impostures of theology. As my thesis is defined in my subtitle, a farrago of palpable nonsense, in the words of the Dean of American Critics, is about all that remains of Holy Writ as the pretended Word of God as a result of that searching analysis. That study was limited in most part to sacred texts for the internal evidence, which themselves so abundantly afford of their own falsity and primitive-minded fatuity. So this is basically talking about the Roman Catholic Church and its branch-offs, that pagan form of Christianity, or that Christianity / pagan form, modern Christianity, etc. That study was limited in most part to sacred texts for the internal evidences, which themselves so abundantly afford of their own falsity and primitive-minded fatuity. On the other phase of inquiry, I there limited myself to the suggestive remark. The Gospels are all priestly forgeries over a century after their pretended dates. There you go, they're forgeries. They're forgeries, right? That they've done throughout the centuries, say from Martin Luther to the modern Americanized English modern Bible versions that they put out into the world and everyone's preaching from. The Gospels are all priestly forgeries over a century after their pretended dates. Page 279, compare page 400. Purposing them to complete the works by this sequel or companion volume, treating the frauds and forgeries of religion and church. Taking up now more particularly the second phase of this author's subject, he therefore proposed to treat of the inveterate forgeries, frauds, impostures, and mendacities of priestcraft and its theology. He would be explicit and plain-spoken and unmistakably state his purpose and his proofs. For nearly 2,000 years the priestcraft of Christendom, for purposes of domination by fear and greedy exploitation through imposture upon credulity, has consigned to earthly fire and sword and to eternal damnation all who dared to dissent or to protest. The priestly word miscreant, misbeliever, has become the synonym for everything foul and criminal in human nature. The day of reckoning and of repudiation is at hand. Priestcraft has here its destroying answer in very plain and unafraid words. This book is a grave indictment, impossible to be made or to be credited unless supported at every point by incontrovertible facts, and the author promised to produce an array in due and devastating order. The indictment. He charges and purposes to prove from unimpeachable texts and historical records and by authoritative clerical confessions beyond the possibility of denial, evasion or refutation. 1. That the Bible in its every book and in the strictest legal and moral sense is a huge forgery. Okay, we'd say that which came from the Mother Church, that one Mother Church. Yeah, sure. It's been corrupted, etc., etc. 2. That every book of the New Testament is a forgery of the Christian Church, and every significant passage in those books on which the fabric of the church and its principal dogmas are founded in is a further and conscious state of forgery wrought with definite fraudulent intent. So what about the ones outside of this Roman Catholic Church, the non-adherents, non-associates, like the Lutherans, the Anglicans, etc.? Say the original ancient Apostolic Church of the East, erroneously called Nestorians, who have a completely different original ancient hidden from Constantine and the Roman Catholic Church manuscripts, which being hidden were preserved for over 2,000 years by the Apostolic Church of the East, never translated because they didn't need to. It's exclusive to their particular church and the people in their mass or in attendance of their mass who spoke the same language, so they fully understood it. But there would have been different dialects in Africa, etc., of this original Aramaic or Syriac. And then Victor N. Alexander, translated from Mesopotamian Syria, gets a hold of it, a copy of these original manuscripts from high priest of that church in Bible format, and then he does a certain method to translate all into the nearest English equivalent, of which we came across before his translation project website va.com was down. We then revived it, and this is what we're bringing to you through our YouTube channel, the Ministry of the Real Truth. 3. Especially and specifically that the famous Petrine or Peter text, upon this rock I will build my church. This is what Christ said to Peter. The cornerstone of the gigantic fabric of imposture and the other go teach all nations were never uttered by the Jew Jesus, but a palpable and easily proven late church forgeries. Okay, well, we have the original ancient, very old, hidden and preserved Galilean Aramaic manuscripts translated into the nearest English equivalent, which actually do say that Christ said this to Peter. Okay, he called him keeper, meaning the rock is the foundation which he will build his church, a church not built by hands, a proper spiritual church, his church. 4. That the Christian church from its inception in the first little Jewish Christian religious societies until it reached the apex of its temporal glory and moral degradation was a vast and tireless forgery mill, so this author claims. 5. That the church was founded upon and through the dark ages of faith has battened on, and this again it's talking about the Roman Catholic Church, yet languishes decadently upon monumental and petty forgeries and pious frauds, possibly only because of its own shameless mendacity and through the crass ignorance and superstition of the sodden masses of its deluded votaries, purposely kept in that base condition for purposes of ecclesiastical graft and aggrandizement through conscious and most unconscionable imposture. Perhaps they were after coin. It's a way to control the people and to get coin. That every conceivable form that every conceivable form of religious lie, fraud and imposture has ever been the work of priests of that particular church, right? And through all the history of the Christian church, okay, because this is the Roman Catholic Church, the Roman empirical state church. It's not the congregation of Jerusalem of the 12 disciples, Jesus and 12 disciples, because again he said on this rock, or Peter, through Peter I will build my church, a church built without hands. It's very, very different. Okay? And they never called themselves Christians because that was a loan word of the Romans from the Greek Christos, which they referred to the followers of Yeshua Mashiach, or Jesus the Messiah, as slaves to the Christ or Christus. So them being Galilean Aramaeans or Galileans who were under this Mosaic law of the Pharisees and Sadducees, the Mosaic law, etc., they were very kosher. They never spent any time with these non-Jews or Gentiles, foreigners. They refused to. They wouldn't be in the same room as them, same house as them, wouldn't eat the same food. They had very kosher food. Yeah, they're more vegetarian, very little meat eaters. Certain animals they wouldn't eat because of the Mosaic law. And they called themselves Mashikai because they didn't want to be called or thought of as Christians, peoples that were converts to their faith, say like the Greeks, etc., that were in Damascus, or the Romans who wanted to be part of that faith or started up their own Roman Imperial Church, which was Christian pagan through Constantine, etc. Okay, so they're basically saying we are separate, we are not like them. We are Mashikai, we are followers of the Messiah, not these pagan Christians. Six, that every conceivable form of religious lie, fraud and imposture has ever been the work of priests, and through all the history of the Christian Church, as through all human history, has been, and so far as they have not been shamed out of it by skeptical ridicule and exposure, yet is the age-long stock and trade and sole means of existence of the priests and ministers of all religions. According to this author. 7. That the clerical mind which reasons in chains is from its vicious and vacuous education, and the special selfish interest of the priestly class, incapable either of the perception or the utterance of truth in matters where the interests of priestcraft are concerned. As the Catholic Protestant skeptic Bale of 17th century fame said, I am most truly a Protestant, for I protest indifferently against all systems and all sects of religious imposture. Well, him being a reformist, a Protestant, and a reformist, yeah, he's along with Luther, etc., or followed after Luther, etc., saw that there was much needed changes needed to the doctrines and dogmas of the Roman State Catholic Church. His accusal, therefore, is not limited in purpose, scope, or effect to any one church or sect, but is aimed alike at all of the discordant factions of ancient Jewish and more modern Christian faith. Yeah, this is the author, who's stating this. For, as has been well said, faith is not knowledge, no more than 3 is 4, but eminently contained in it, so that he knows, believes, and sometimes more, or something more, but he that believes many times does not know. Nay, if he doeth barely and merely believe, he doeth never not. Okay, so that's the Catholic Protestant skeptic Bale there saying that. The same critical cleric at another place said, still less was it ever intended that men should so prostitute their reason as believe with infallible faith what they are unable to prove with infallible arguments. Chillingworth, Religion of Protestants, page or paragraph 66, 412. With infallible facts, the author's purpose is to blast the false pretenses of priests' forged faith. It is a matter of fact that for some 1500 years of this era there was but one true Church of Christ, and that church claims with conscious pride the origin and authorship of all the New Testament books, one of its own holy bosom, by its own canonized saints. Well, so is he saying that the one true church is the Roman Catholic Church, the Mother Church? That's what it sounds like. But there was one before that, we pre-mentioned, of the disciples, of Jesus of the disciples, where he uttered, I will, upon this rock, or Peter, through Peter, I will build my church, a church built without hands. Very different in comparison. The New Testament books are therefore distinctively Catholic documents. That's the Catholic means universal, so yeah, in that sense, yeah. But they're not necessarily the ones of the Christ, the manuscripts, etc., whatever they wrote down, they heard and saw Christ do, right? That church, therefore, if these as credentials and documents are forgeries, well, we can put a video on the end as an end screen after this video. The American Bible Society and similar, and their pamphlets and their lies, researched by Bearded Brian with the glasses. Okay, to verify that, it's talking about the Roman Catholic Church. That church, therefore, if these its credentials and documents are forgeries, as from its own records, this author would prove, itself forged all the books of the New Testament and all the documents of religious dogma and propaganda, the forgery of which shall be proved in this book, and did itself perpetuate all the pious frauds herein revealed, and is their chief beneficiary. So they benefit most from all of that. Coin-wise, all the other Christian sects, however, are sprung or severed from the original one true church. He's going on about that Roman Catholic Church being the one true church. All other forms of the Christian religion originated by secession from the true church, and the founders were externally members of the church. CE 7867. Maybe it's a Christian era or something. Some book. Or church edition or something. Not really sure. All these Protestant sects, therefore, were full knowledge of the guilty facts and partakers in the frauds, found their claim to divinity and priestly emoluments upon and through those tainted titles, and thus yet fully share the guilt as accomplices after the fact. The reformed sects, or breaking away from the old monopoly of forgery, appropriated the least clumsy and more plausible of the pious counterfeit of Christianity, and for the centuries since have industriously and knowingly been engaged in passing the stolen counterfeit upon their own suspecting flocks. They are therefore equally guilty with the original forgers of the faith. Outline of case and proofs. The proofs of his indictment are marvellously easy. They are to be found in ample store of history and accredited ecclesiastical authorities, and in abounding and cautious admissions made by the accredited spokesman of the accused. Upon these the author would freely and fully draw for complete proofs of his every specification. These damning things of the church, scattered through many clerical volumes and concealed in many archives, are not well known to the pious or preoccupied layman. The author's task was simply to bring together the documentary proofs and expose them before the astonished eyes of the modern reader. That is the prime merit of his work. To accomplish this purpose with unimpeachable certitude, he need not and made no apology for the liberal use of quotation marks in presenting the ensuing startling array of accusations and confessions, to be followed by the plenary proofs. As in the judicial process, the author, before proceeding to the concrete proofs, would define first the crime charge and outline the scope of the evidence to be presented, and then he would make a prima facie justification of the charges by citing a few generalities of confession of guilt with corroborations by weighty supporting authorities, and thus create the proper atmosphere for the appreciation of the facts. Then shall come the shaming proofs in astounding detail. And he defines forgery. Forgery in legal and moral sense is thus the utterance or publication with intent to deceive or defraud, or to gain some advantage of a false document put out by one person in the name of and as the genuine work of another who did not execute it, or the subsequent alteration of a genuine document by one who did not execute the original. This species of falsification extends alike to all classes of writing, promissory notes, the coin or currency of the realm, to any legal or private document, or to a book. All are counterfeit or forged if not authentic and untampered. So that would mean that the original ancient, very old Tab Asheret, Aramaic, Lisana Atticus of Prayer, Old Testament, and the Galilean Aramaic New Testament manuscripts, which are verified as authentic by Victor Alexander and by the Apostolic Church of the East, the Patriarchates, the High Priests, etc., and have not been tampered with, verified or testified to by former head Patriarchate in 1957, Ma Isa Shimon. It was on Andrew Gabriel Roth's website, the AramaicsCryptures.com, but for some reason he took it down. But you can find it in one of his published books. We found it in an ebook where he makes it statement that the day that the original manuscripts were given to the high priest of that church by the blessed hands of Thomas, the disciple, they'd never been translated, tampered with, altered, etc. They remained latent because they hid them for over 2,000 years, so therefore they were preserved intact, never been messed with. They may have been translated because at some point, because Victor and Alexander had found that they're probably translating the Eastern Peshitta, Syriac Peshitta, found that they're all translated wrong. Incorrectly, so he retranslated it all. He started with the Syriac Peshitta, apparently, with the Peshitta. Then he was told by a priest of the high priest of the Apostolic Church of the East that what he was translating was actually wrong. They don't use that, etc., etc., according to the translation project. So he thought, hey, he got really depressed for about a year, and then he worked on it using a certain method. He translated that old dead language from those original ancient manuscripts, hidden and preserved, etc., into the nearest English equivalent around 1997 to 98, and in his translation project website, va.com. It was taken down about 2016 or 17, as far as we know. So we revived it, and that's what we're bringing to you. Forgery, Latin, falsum, differs very slightly from fraud. It consists in the deliberate untruthfulness of an assertion or in the deceitful presentation of an object, and is based on an intention to deceive and to injure, while using the externals of honesty. When they basically got this hidden motive, this agenda, but they're pretending to be, it's the truth. Okay, we're being honest here, we're not lying. Forgery is truly a falsehood and is a fraud, but it is sometimes more. It's something more. A category consists in making use of such forgery and is equivalent to forgery proper. The canonical legislation dealt principally with the production of absolutely false documents. So again, it is referring to the Roman Catholic Church and its and then its branch-offs, breakers. Forgery is truly a falsehood and is fraud, but it is something more. A category consists in making use of such forgery and is equivalent to forgery proper. The canonical legislation dealt principally with the production of absolutely false documents and the alteration of authentic for the sake of certain advantages in their best interest, right? Canon law connects forgery and the use of forged documents on the presumption that he who would make use of such documents must be either the author or instigator of the forgery. In canon law, forgery consists not only in the fabrication or substitution of an entirely false document, but even by a partial substitution or by an alteration affecting the sense and bearing of an authentic document or any substantial point, such as names, dates, signatures, seal, favour granted by erasure, by scratching out or writing one word over another, and the like. Catholic Encyclopedia 6, 185, 186. Under every phase and phrase of this its own clerical legal definition, the Church is guilty, is most guilty. Bang goes the gavel. A beginning of miracles, of confession, of ecclesiastical guilt, of forgery of church documents is made in the same above article by the Encyclopedia. Very many others will follow in due course from the same source. Substitution of false documents and tampering with genuine ones was quite a trade in the Middle Ages. Innocent III, that's Pope Innocent III, 1198, points out 9 species of forgery of ecclesiastical records, which had come under his notice. CE 6, 186. But such frauds of the Church were not confined to the Middle Ages. They begin even with the beginning of the Church and infest every period of its history for 1500 years and defile nearly every document, both of scriptures and of church aggrandizement, as truly said by Collins in the celebrated Discourse of Free Thinking. In short, these frauds are very common in all books which are published by priests or priestly men, for it is certain they may plead the authority of the fathers for forgery, corruption, and mangling of authors with more reason than for any of their articles of faith. Page 96. Bishop Eusebius of Caesarea, the great father of church history, 324 AD, whom Niebuhr terms a very dishonest writer, of which we shall see many notable instances, says this: "But it is not our place to describe the sad misfortunes which finally came upon the Christians, as we do not think it proper, moreover, to record their divisions and unnatural conduct to each other before the persecution by Diocletian, 305 AD. Wherefore, we have decided to relate nothing concerning them, except things in which we can vindicate the divine judgment. But we shall introduce into this history in general only those events which may be useful first to ourselves and afterwards to posterity." Ecclesiastical History 8.2 NNPNF 1.323.324. Eusebius himself fraudulently subscribed to the Trinitarian Creed formed by the Council of Nicaea, but making no secret in the letter which he wrote to his own church of the non-natural sense in which he accepted it. Catholic Encyclopedia 5619. As St. Jerome says, Eusebius is the most open champion of the Arian heresy, which denies the Trinity. Jerome, Epistle 84-2, NNPNF 6176. Bishop Eusebius, as we shall see, was one of the most prolific forgers and liars of his age of the Church, and a great romancer in his hair-raising histories of the holy martyrs. He assures us that on some occasion the bodies of the martyrs who had been devoured by wild beasts, upon the beasts being strangled, were found alive in their stomachs, even after having been fully digested. Now, how does that work? Chews them all up. It's like a shark chews somebody all up, right? And then they opened up and the person's like, "Hey, I'm in here, I'm still alive." It defies logic, reason and common sense, right? In reality. Quoted, given, History, chapter 37, Lardner 4, page 91, Diegesis, page 272. To such an extent had the pious frauds of the theologians been thus early systematized and raised to the dignity of regular doctrine, that Bishop Eusebius, in one of the most learned and elaborate works that antiquity has left us, the 32nd chapter of the 12th book of his evangelical preparation, bears for its title the scandalous proposition, how it may be lawful and fitting to use falsehood as a medicine, and for the benefit of those who want to be deceived, quoting the Greek title, Gibbon, Vindication, page 76. St. John Chrysostom, the golden-mouthed, in his work on the priesthood, had a curious panegyric on the clerical habit of telling lies. Great is the force of deceit, provided it is not excited by a treacherous intention. Comments on 1 Corinthians 9:19, Diegesis, page 309. Chrysostom was one of the Greek fathers of the Church, concerning whom Dr. later Cardinal Newman thus apologetically spoke. The Greek fathers thought that when there was a just cause, an untruth needed not be a lie. Now, as to the just cause, the Greek fathers make them such as these: self-defense, charity, zeal for God's honour, and the like. Newman, Apology for His Life, Appendix G, page 345-6. He says nothing of his favourites, the Latin fathers, but we shall hear them described and amply see their work lying in their zeal for God's honour and to their own dishonour. The great Latin father St. Jerome, around 840 to 420, who made the celebrated Vulgate version of the Bible and wrote books of the most marvellous saint tales and martyr yarns, thus described the approved methods of Christian propaganda of the fathers, Greek and Latin alike, against the pagans. To confute the opposer, now this argument is adduced, and now that one argues as one pleases, saying that one thing while one means another. Origen, Methodius, Eusebius, and Apollinaris write at great length against Celsus and Porphyry. Consider how subtle are the arguments, how insidious the engines with which they overthrow what the spirit of the devil has wrought. Sometimes it is true, they are compelled to say not what they think, but what is needful. I say nothing of the Latin authors of Tertullian, Cyprian, Minutius, Victorianus, Lactantius, Hilary, lest I should appear not so much to be defending myself as to be assailing others. I will only mention the Apostle Paul. He then, if anyone ought to be calumniated, we should speak thus to him: the proofs which you have used against the Jews and against other heretics bear a different meaning in their own context. to that which they bear in your epistles. We see passages taken captive by your pen and pressed into service to win you a victory, which, in volumes from which they are taken, have no controversial bearing at all. The line so often adopted by strong men in controversy of justifying the means by the result. Jerome, Epistle to Pamacus, said 60, maybe that's 58. Never been good with the Roman numerals, had to practice it, I suppose. 13, N and P and F. 6, 72 to 78, see post page 230. Of Eusebius and the others, he again says that they presume at the price of their soul to assist dogmatically whatever first comes into their head. Jerome, Epistle 51, 7, ed. page 88. And again of the incentive offered by the gullible ignorance of the faithful. For the glib mendacities of the priests, there's nothing so easy as by sheer volume or vulnerability to deceive a common crowd or an uneducated congregation. Epistle 52, 8, page 93. Father Jerome's own high regard for truth and his zeal in propaganda of fables for edification of the ignorant ex-pagan Christians is illustrated in numberless instances. He tells us of the river Ganges in India, which has its sources in paradise. So the Ganges goes all the way back to the Garden of Eden in paradise, right? That in India are also mountains of gold, which however men cannot approach by reason of the griffins, dragons and huge monsters which haunt them, for such are the guardians which avarice needs for its treasures. Epistle. Okay. He reaches the climax in his famous Lives of Sundry Saints. He relates with all fervour the marvellous experiences of the blessed hermit Paulus, who was 113 years of age and for 60 years had lived in a hole in the ground in the remotest recesses of the desert. And it sounds like that guy with the long ass beard that had that juniper tree on The Life of Brian, and Brian stepped in there and stepped on his foot. He went, oh, my foot, my foot. And then they started eating his juniper tree berries, right, his juniper berries. Okay. Sounds a bit like that guy. He relates with all fervour the marvellous experiences of the blessed hermit Paulus, who was 113 years of age and for 60 years had lived in a hole in the ground in the remotest recesses of the desert. His nearest neighbour was Saint Anthony, who was only 90 and lived in another hole 4 days' journey away. So like living in holes, right? The existence and whereabouts of Paulus being revealed to Anthony in a vision, he set out afoot to visit the holy Paulus. On the way, all at once, he beholds a creature of mingled shape, half horse, half man, called by the poets Hippo Centaur, with whom he holds friendly converse, or chat. Later he sees a mannequin with hooked snout, horned forehead, and extremities like goat's feet, this being one of the desert tribe whom the Gentiles worship under the name of fauns, satyrs, and incubi, and whose strange language Anthony was rejoiced to find that he could understand as they reasoned together about the salvation of the Lord. Let no one scruple to believe this incident, pleads Father Jerome. Its truth is supported by one of these creatures that was captured and brought alive to Alexandria and sent embalmed to the Emperor Antioch. Finally, Holy Anthony reached the retreat of the blessed Paulus and was welcomed. As they talked, a raven flew down and laid a whole loaf of bread at their feet. See, said Paulus, the Lord loving, truly merciful, has sent us a meal. For the last 60 years I have always received half a loaf, but at your coming the Lord has doubled his soldiers' rations. During the visit, Paulus died. Anthony saw Paulus in robes of snowy white, ascending on high among a band of angels and the choirs of prophets and apostles. Anthony dragged the body out to bury it, but was without means to dig a grave. And as he was lamenting this unhappy circumstance, behold, 2 lions from the recesses of the desert, with manes flying on their necks, came rushing along. They came straight to the corpse of the blessed old man, fawned on it, roared in mourning, then with their paws dug a grave just wide and deep enough to hold the corpse, came over it and licked the hands and feet of Anthony and ambled away. Jerome, Life of Paulus, the First Hermit, N and PNF, 6, 299. Sequel. So gross and prevalent was the clerical habit of pious lies and pretences to the glory of God. That St. Augustine, about 395 AD, wrote a reproving treatise to the clergy, De Mendatio, on lying, which he found necessary to supplement in 420 with another book, Contra Mendacium, against lying. This work, says Bishop Wordsworth, is a protest against these pious frauds, which have brought discredit and damage on the cause of the gospel, and have created prejudice against it from the days of Augustine to our own times. In Church History 493-94. While Augustine disapproves of downright lying, even to trap heretics, a practice seemingly much in vogue among the good Christians, it is more pernicious for Catholics to lie that they may catch heretics, than for heretics to lie that they may not be found out by Catholics. Against Lying, Chapter 5, N and P and F 3-483. Yet this saint heartily approves and argues in support of the chronic clerical characteristics of the suppressio veri, of suppression or concealment of the truth for the sake of Christian edification, a device for the encouragement of credulity among the faithful, which has run right through the centuries and flourishes today among the priests and the ignorant pious. It is lawful then either to him that discourses, disputes, and preaches of things eternal, or to him that narrates or speaks of things temporal pertaining to edification of religion or piety, to conceal at fitting times whatever seems fit to be concealed, but to tell a lie is never lawful, therefore neither to conceal by telling a lie. Augustine, on Lying, Chapter 19, N and P and F 3-466. The great bishop did not, however, it seems, wreck his own reed when it came to preaching unto edification, for in one of his sermons he thus relates a very notable experience. I was already Bishop of Hippo when I went into Ethiopia with some servants of Christ that had preached the gospel. In this country we saw many men and women without heads, who had 2 great eyes in their breasts, and in countries still more southly we saw people who had but 1 eye in their foreheads. Augustine's Sermon 37, quoted in Taylor Syntagma, page 152. Diegesis, page 271. Dawan, Bible Myths, page 437. To the mind's eye, the wonderful spectacle is represented as the great saint preached the word of God to those acephalos faithful. We see the whole congregation of devout and intelligent Christians, without heads, watching attentively without eyes, listening intently without ears, and understanding perfectly without brains. The spirited and spiritual harangue of the eloquent and veracious St. Augustine, and every hearer of the sermon in which he told about it believed in fullness of faith and infantile credulity every word of the noble Bishop of Hippo, giving thanks to God that the words of life and salvation had been by him carried to so remarkable a tribe of God's curious children. Pope Gregory the Great, 590-604, in one momentary lapse in his own arduous labours of propagating lies to the glory of God, made the pious gesture. God does not need our lies, but his church evidently did, for the pious work went lying on, a work given immense impetus by his holiness Gregory himself. Pope Gregory, in his mendacious dialogues and other papal output, with little abatement unto this day. A further admission of the inveteracy of ecclesiastical forgery and fraud may be cited from the Catholic Encyclopedia. Speaking depreciatingly of the incredible liberty of discussion which, to the shock and scandal of the pious prelates, prevailed in Rome under the spell of the Renaissance, when men's minds were beginning to awaken from the intellectual and moral stupor of the dark ages of faith, the Catholic thesaurus of archaic superstition and Catholic truth admits this toleration of evils, i.e. the free discussion of church doctrines and documents, bore one good consequence. It allowed historical criticism to begin fear. There was need for a revision which is not yet complete, ranging over all that has been handed down from the Middle Ages under the style and title of the Fathers, the Councils, the Roman and other official archives. In all these departments, forgery and interpolations, as well as ignorance, had wrought mischief on a great scale. CE 12-768. To these preliminary confessions of the guilty church may be added the corroborating testimony of several eminently accredited historical authorities. Middleton, in his epochal or apocryphal free inquiry into the lying habits and miracles of the churchmen, says many spurious books were forged in the earliest times of the church in the name of Christ and his apostles, which passes upon all the fathers as genuine and divine through several successive ages. Middleton, Free Inquiry, Int Disc, page 52, is it? London 1749. The same author whose book set England ringing with its exposures of the lies and fraudulent miracles of the church makes this acute and accurate summing up of his evidences. It will not appear strange to those who have given any attention to the history of mankind, which will always suggest this sad reflection, that the greatest zealots in religion, or the leaders of sects and parties, SECTS and parties, whatever purity or principles they pretend to have seldom scrupled to make use of a commodious lie for the advancement of what they call the truth. And with regard to these very fathers, there is not one of them, as an eminent writer of ecclesiastical history declares, who made any scruple in those ages of using the hyperbolical style to advance the honour of God and the salvation of men. Free Inquiry, page 88 or 83, citing Joe Historical Ecclesiastes, page 681. Lecky, distinguished author of the history of European morals, devotes much research into what he describes as the deliberate and apparently perfectly unscrupulous forgery of a whole literature destined to further propagation either of Christianity as a whole or of some particular class of tenets. Lecky, History of European Morals, volume 1, page 375. In this very notable history of rationalism, speaking of that Christian epoch, when faith and facts did not cultivate an acquaintance, the same author, Lecky, thus describes the state of intellectual and moral obliquity into which the church had forced even the ablest classes of society. During that gloomy period, the only scholars in Europe were priests and monks who conscientiously believed that no amount of falsehood was reprehensible which conduced to the edification of the people. All their writings, and more especially their histories, became tissues of the wildest fables, so grotesque and at the same time so audacious that they were the wonder of succeeding ages. And the very men who scattered these fictions, broadcast over Christendom, taught at the same time that credulity was a virtue and scepticism a crime. Lecky, History of Rationalism, 1, 396. In the same work last quoted, Lecky again, speaking of what he terms the pious frauds of theologians, which he shows were systematized and raised to the dignity of regular doctrine, says of the pious fathers. The fathers laid down as a distinct proposition that pious frauds were justifiable and even laudable, and if they had not laid this down, they would nevertheless have practiced them as a necessary consequence of their doctrine of exclusive salvation. Immediately all ecclesiastical literature became tainted with a spirit of the most unblushing mendacity. Heathenism was to be combated, and therefore prophecies of Christ by Orpheus and his sibyls were forged, lying wonders were multiplied. Heretics were to be convinced, and therefore interpolations of old writings or complete forgeries were habitually opposed to the forged Gospels. The tendency triumphed wherever the supreme importance of dogmas was held. Generation after generation it became more universal. It continued till the very sense of truth and the very love of truth seemed blotted out from the minds of men. Lecky, Rationalism in Europe, 1, 396-7. There is thus disclosed a very sharp and shaming contrast between the precept of the Lord Buddha, "Thou shalt not attempt, either by words or action, to lead others to believe that which is not true, and to confess the basic principle of the Church, that the maintenance of its creed, even by the methods of fraud, forgery and imposture, above hinted and to be evidenced, is superior to the principles of morality. To undo the creed is to undo the Church. The integrity of the rule of faith is more essential to the cohesion of a religious society than the strict practice of its moral precepts." CE 7:259. With its consciousness of the shifty and shady practices of its sacred profession, the Christian priestcraft differs not from the pagan in the sneer of Cicero, Cato, Murari, etc., etc. Cato used to wonder how one of our priests can forbear laughing when he sees another. Quoted Opera, edition Gron, page 3806. We shall see all too well that the pagan estimate holds good for the Christian, that, as said by the universal scholar Grotius, ecclesiastical history consists of nothing but the wickedness of the governing clergy. Qui legit historiam ecclesiasticum quid legit nisi episcoporum vicias, in Italian obviously, epistola stoli, page 7, column 1, and so forth. Okay, that basically has covered the fraud. If you enjoyed that, even though it's just a fraud, you haven't touched on the book, then join us for part 2. But first, subscribe to our channel, give us a like, add your comments below this video, and then go share this with all your family, friends and others who may be in this Roman Catholic Church. We're not trying to downtrod them or whatever, because there are, or crush their faith totally, there are very pious, true to the fact Roman Catholic believers amongst that particular church. Maybe they need to be shown, hey, this is what's going on within your own Roman Catholic Church. You need to watch this, have a look at it, and make some changes, get out of it, like possibly the Christ said to John in Revelations, come out of her before you share in her plagues, the false church, if that is actually her. We have reserved ideas that it may not necessarily be her, the Roman Catholic Church, but maybe she is one of them that gets totally wiped out. But there's another one that mainly gets wiped out. It has to happen, because for there to be a new, you have to get rid of the old. Okay, so again, if you like this, subscribe to our channel, give us a like, add your comments below in the comment section, and we'll get back to you on those as soon as we can. And you can go share this eye-opening video to all your family, friends and others.